Shall I just do it? So, Jawara, what does Carnival mean to you personally, and how has it shaped your identity as a Caribbean designer?
What does Carnival mean to me personally? For me, Carnival is identity. It's culture, it's people, it's space, it's confidence, it's protest, it's resilience, it's togetherness, it's home. I think Carnival means a lot for Caribbean people, which is why it ends up cropping up wherever we go. But for me personally, Carnival is where the culture can be defiant. It's where the culture can speak out about things that are happening within our spaces, within our communities. At least traditional Carnival. In a more direct way. Pretty much, I think, does that in an indirect way. But Carnival as a whole, I think, is a place where, and one of the only places where we can speak honestly, speak freely, also speaking with humor, speaking without using words as well. The language that comes out of Carnival, the language of materialism, the language of bodies moving, the language of being comfortable in your own skin, the language of existing and taking up space, the language of community and connection. I think all of these things comes under Carnival for me, which I think is really why it's so important at a time like now to really invest in honoring that part of my culture and my history and my story, but also really invest in elevating it from a creative point of view and using the collection to expand on how you can take reference and be inspired by Carnival. I think developing the Untitled collection really came out of that feeling of like growing up within this place where you find a different way that is alternative to the norm. You find a new way of creating something because there's always an answer. There's always a way around it, and you just have to be creative with how you can solve that problem. So I think while developing the Untitled collection, I didn't directly reference or have that link directly, but it's something that's just deep within the psychology and deep within the philosophy of where and how I naturally have developed this brand and the projects within the brand and the way that I work more as an artist rather than just a designer that's just designing product. I think coming from that place of Carnival gave me the capacity to think about things in a different point of view, and also just to have that interest in general in finding a new way of working around problems.
Is that the last one? Yeah. Sweet.
So in thinking about the Converse collab and in thinking about the Converse, how I actually approached the shoe, there's one particular character in Carnival. It's the character of a town jest, or like a jester, or like the town crier almost. And the way that that character appears is that he is usually wearing a shredded kind of tunic almost, and is a very clear depiction of that deconstruction at play, where you're taking different bed sheets, different kinds of fabrics that you find, and you're shredding them and then turning that into a tunic or turning that into a garment. I guess it's even a starting point for the Converse project, starting point for the collection, is this project that I did in Cayman right before I started my MA actually, where I was investigating Carnival costumes and really looking at this act of storytelling that we do. And this sort of, it's really interesting because the Caribbean can tend to be a very homophobic space, but within our culture we're actually not, in terms of the way that we express within art. Looking at the Carnival characters, for instance, there's a sort of cosplay that steps outside of gender norms, where you have male people playing female characters, or male people playing gender non-conforming characters. And that's something that I always found to be really fascinating in who gets to define and how we get to define what culture actually is. Because when you start looking back in culture, you start to realize that actually we were never initially homophobic. We were never initially sort of having these barriers as it relates to how we view ourselves as people, how we view ourselves within culture, what the rules are, what the negotiations within culture is within that social space. And I've always been really fascinated in going back in history to find points that and moments where the culture itself that we are a part of directly speaks against the way that we are treating the culture now and what we consider to be normal now. So this page I think is really important because I was going back into those Carnival costumes and sort of examining and investigating and capturing really how Carnival holds the space where you can blur those lines between gender, and it's not something that is trying to prove a point outside of the point that it's trying to prove, which is that anyone can step into any character to convey the message that it is that they're trying to convey. Within the book, 2 pages actually within the book, that really sort of delves deeper into storytelling and into Carnival and the way that you can create and tell stories. I mean, this image, for instance, is, you quite often have a winged figure in Carnival, and Pretty Mass now really incorporates the idea of the wings. And that's something that I think is really quite beautiful in terms of the way that it, and that figure, I'm not really even sure where and how we arrived at this figure of the human with the wings, but then it just gets broken down in these really interesting ways where you might have a butterfly, you might have a beautiful flower, you might have a hummingbird, you might have a dove. Now it kind of appears in this Victoria's Secret type, just feathered wings type character, but within traditional masque and within Carnival, you have these winged characters that conveys messages beyond whatever the initial starting point for that thing was. So, for instance, you have this winged character, which I always find to be really fab. This design, which really encapsulates the Caymanian identity, I guess. Then you have this one that, for me, I connect with because of my Rastafarian background as well. And those colors I think are really fab.
We gonna get there, guys. Don't worry. Shit.
quite often what happens now is that there's an emphasis on pretty mass, which is the new version of Carnival, but the traditional version of Carnival is really where you see the politics and the socioeconomic dialogues and identity issues really being discussed and really being sort of investigated. So yeah, I wanted to pull from the traditional space of Carnival and link that within a modern global context. Then just naturally developed in such a way where it was really about investing and giving back to my community. So the shoes for that initial release, they were not sold, they were just basically given to my muses, family, community, which I think is also another really important part of Carnival that is really difficult to capture because it's something that's quite ephemeral. It's not a sort of defined visual that makes it very easy to understand, but that feeling of community and the way that we come together and the way that we support each other, I think is really important to Carnival, and really defines what Carnival is, especially when you go to the Caribbean and places like Brazil and places that still have and hold that sort of indigenous local feel to how Carnival then grows.
Making a right to